Hello everyone.
About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be very happy if you did.
I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Story 1. I was driving home late at night after a long day. The road was quiet, just a long stretch of highway with barely any traffic. The headlights from my car cut through the darkness as I stayed focused on the lane ahead. I had been on the road for a little over an hour, and all I could think about was getting home, taking a shower, and crawling into bed. I kept the radio low, just enough to fill the silence and keep me from drifting into my thoughts too deeply. Out of nowhere, I noticed a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I did not think much of it. It was a highway, and cars appeared now and then, especially around this time. But as the vehicle got closer, I realized it was a large truck, and it was tailgating me aggressively. I checked my speed, but I was not driving slow. In fact, I was going slightly above the limit. Still, this truck kept getting closer until it felt like it was just inches from my bumper. I assumed the driver wanted to pass, so I slowed down slightly and began to move toward the shoulder to let them by. But the moment I made that move, the truck followed closely and shifted lanes with me. It was like the driver was matching my every move, refusing to pass even when there was plenty of room. A chill ran down my spine as I returned to the lane, hoping it was just a coincidence. I checked my mirrors again, but the truck remained directly behind me. I turned off the radio to focus, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter. I kept glancing between my mirrors and the road, my heart starting to pound harder with every second that passed. The truck did not back off. If anything, it felt like it was pushing me forward, trying to intimidate me. I tapped my brakes slightly, hoping to signal the driver to back off, but it only made things worse. The truck flashed its high beams, flooding my car with light, and my chest tightened with dread. I began to wonder if the driver was angry about something I had done. Maybe they thought I had cut them off earlier without realizing. I tried to recall every moment on the road since I had left my last stop, but nothing stood out. I had been driving alone, cautiously, minding my own business. There was no reason for this kind of behavior. Whatever this was, it felt deliberate now, not just a case of road rage. My phone was in the passenger seat, and I glanced at it briefly. I did not want to take my eyes off the road for long, especially with the truck so close. I considered calling someone, maybe even dialing 911, but I still was not sure if it was serious enough. I kept telling myself it would stop soon, that the driver would get bored or take an exit. But mile after mile passed, and the truck stayed with me like a shadow. I noticed an upcoming exit and decided to take it, hoping the truck would continue on the main road. As I signaled and slowed down to make the turn, my heart sank when I saw the truck mirror my movements once again. I took the exit anyway, determined to lose them somehow. I hoped the smaller roads and tighter turns might discourage them from continuing. But when I turned off onto a dimly lit side street, the truck followed right behind me. By now, my body was shaking. My mind raced through possibilities, trying to figure out what to do next. I was in an unfamiliar part of town with no visible stores or gas stations open. The streets were mostly empty, just street lights casting long shadows across the pavement. I considered pulling over in a well-lit area to confront the driver, but fear kept me from doing it. I did not know what kind of person was behind the wheel, and I did not want to take that risk. I kept driving, making random turns and trying to lose the truck, but nothing worked. Every time I changed direction, the truck followed. I started to believe this was not just intimidation anymore. This person had something else in mind. I could not figure out what it was, but I knew I had to get away. I needed help, but I also needed a plan. Eventually, I spotted a convenience store with its lights still on. It was the first sign of life I had seen in what felt like forever. I turned sharply into the parking lot, tires screeching slightly as I came to a stop near the entrance. I left the engine running and bolted out of the car, rushing inside without looking back. The clerk behind the counter looked up in surprise as I ran to him and asked him to call 911. I explained quickly that a truck had been following me for miles and was still outside. He picked up the phone and dialed right away, his eyes widening as he glanced out the window. I turned to look and saw the truck parked at the far end of the lot, headlights still on, engine idling. It stayed there for a minute before slowly backing up and disappearing around the corner. I stood frozen, unsure if it was truly gone or just waiting nearby. The clerk handed me the phone, and I spoke to the dispatcher, giving them all the details I could remember. The police arrived within minutes. I stepped outside with one of the officers while the other took a look around the area. I described the truck in detail, the route it followed, and how it mimicked every turn I made. The officer nodded calmly and told me I had done the right thing by stopping at a public place. He said these types of incidents, while rare, did happen, and it was important not to confront the person or pull over on an empty road. They offered to escort me home or to the nearest police station so I could file a formal report. I chose to go to the station. I wanted this on record in case it happened again. As I sat there filling out the report, I still felt shaken, but I also felt a growing sense of relief. I had trusted my instincts, and that decision may have saved me from something worse. The officers thanked me for coming forward and promised to keep a lookout for the truck. They said my quick thinking to find a safe location probably stopped the situation from escalating. I knew I might never find out who that person was or what they wanted, but I was grateful that I had stayed alert and acted quickly. That night changed how I viewed driving alone, especially late at night, and I learned to always pay attention to the little details. I drove home later with one of the officers trailing behind me until I reached my driveway. I thanked him before stepping inside and locking the door behind me. I sat on the couch, letting the silence of my home calm me down. I still had so many questions, but one thing was clear. I had made it home safely, and I would not forget the lessons from that night. From then on, I stayed cautious, always ready to listen to my instincts and protect myself no matter what. Story 2. I had been on the road for hours, driving through long stretches of highway under a heavy sky. The hum of the engine and the occasional static from the radio were the only sounds that kept me company. It was well past midnight, and my eyes were getting heavy. I spotted a truck stop a few miles ahead and decided it was time to pull over and rest. The lot was quiet, only a few trucks parked, their engines off and their lights dimmed. I chose a spot near the edge, where the lights from the building barely reached. After locking the doors, I reclined the seat and let myself drift off, thinking I would only sleep for an hour or two. My bag with personal documents and other belongings was tucked behind the seat. I kept my phone plugged in, and everything else seemed secure. It was just a short rest, enough to keep going safely. I closed my eyes with the usual comfort that came with years of doing this. When I woke up, the sun had just begun to rise. A pale light crept through the windshield, and I rubbed my eyes, disoriented. Something felt off. The air was colder than I remembered, and my right side was exposed to the morning breeze. I turned my head and saw the truck door wide open. My breath caught in my throat. Panic surged through me as I sat up, scanning the inside of the truck. My backpack had been dumped out, clothes and papers strewn across the seat and floor. Glove compartment open. Maps, chargers, and receipts tossed in every direction. My wallet was still there, but it had been unzipped. I frantically checked for my license, which thankfully was still inside. But other things were missing. I stepped out, heart pounding, looking around the lot. The other trucks were still parked, still quiet. No sign of movement, no one nearby. I walked a few feet away from my truck, scanning the ground. A few of my papers had blown out and were lying near the next space. I gathered them quickly, checking for anything else that might have been taken. It was confusing. Nothing valuable had been taken, but someone had clearly been inside. I tried to think back. Did I lock the door? I was sure I did. That had always been a habit. I remembered pressing the button, hearing the click. But now I was doubting myself. I sat back down, trying to make sense of it. I checked my phone. Battery was dead. I usually had it charging while I slept, but it looked like someone had unplugged it. Another small thing, but enough to make my stomach turn. I tried to calm down. Maybe it was just a desperate person looking for money or something to steal and sell. They probably got scared off when they saw nothing worth taking. Still, the idea that someone had been inside while I slept was deeply unsettling. I went through my things again, checking for damage. My laptop was untouched, though its case was unzipped. Nothing broken, nothing too important missing. I should have felt relieved, but instead, I just felt violated. It was no longer just about missing things. It was the feeling that someone had watched me, chosen my truck, and gotten that close without me knowing. I decided to report it, just in case. I walked into the truck stop diner and asked if anyone had seen anything suspicious. The woman behind the counter looked surprised, said she hadn't, but that she could check the outside cameras. A few minutes later, someone from the back came out with her and told me the cameras only covered the entrance, not the lot. I thanked them and left, feeling a strange sense of unease. Back in the truck, I cleaned up as best I could. I made a note of what might be missing and tried to brush it off. But every time I tried to move on, I kept thinking about how quiet it had been. How no sound had woken me up. That meant whoever it was had been careful, deliberate. That was what bothered me the most. As I started the truck and pulled out of the lot, I kept glancing in the mirrors. I could not shake the feeling that someone might still be watching. I drove for a while in silence, trying to find a place where I could stop again and breathe. Eventually, I pulled over at a rest area with more people and stronger lighting. I locked the doors again, double-checking this time, and sat quietly. It took a few more hours of driving before I started to calm down. I reminded myself that nothing truly bad had happened. I was safe. My things were mostly intact. It could have been worse, and yet something had changed. I would never again sleep as soundly at a truck stop. In the days that followed, I kept a close eye on my surroundings. I started parking only in well-lit areas, even if it meant driving a bit further. I installed a small motion sensor alarm for the door. It made me feel a little safer. I also backed up everything from my phone and computer, just in case. Even if the person hadn't taken anything valuable, I would not risk losing what mattered. One night, a week later, I stopped at another truck stop, this time closer to the city. I saw a familiar van parked a few rows down. My stomach dropped, but I made sure not to panic. I noted the license plate and walked into the store, casually mentioning the van to the attendant. They agreed to keep an eye on things. I sat down for coffee inside and stayed where I could see my truck. Nothing happened that night. The van was gone by morning. But I realized that being cautious was not about fear. It was about staying alert, being smart, not letting my guard down. That truck stop experience taught me a lesson that stuck with me long after the incident. I became more aware of how vulnerable someone could be, even with locked doors and quiet surroundings. Over time, the panic faded, replaced with habits that made me feel more secure. I spoke with other drivers and found that I was not alone. Many had experienced close calls, strange encounters, and unexpected scares. It was part of the life, something most did not talk about unless prompted. We shared stories, tips, and advice. That support made a difference. Eventually, I found peace again. I no longer woke up in a panic or scanned every shadow with suspicion. I simply took better care, made better choices, and respected the risks of being alone on the road. I kept moving forward, doing the job I loved, and remembering that even in unsettling moments I could take back control. What stayed with me most was not the fear, but the fact that I had not let it change who I was. I adapted, I stayed aware, but I kept going. And every mile that passed reminded me that I was still in charge of where I went and how I lived. That was something no one could take from me. Story 3. The drive started out peaceful. The sun was just beginning to set behind the hills, casting a warm glow over the empty road ahead. I had taken a back route to avoid traffic, thinking it would give me some quiet time before reaching my destination. The landscape was beautiful in a quiet, empty kind of way. There were no houses nearby, just stretches of trees and rolling fields on either side of the narrow road. I had been driving for about an hour without seeing another vehicle. My phone signal had dropped a few miles back, which did not bother me at first. I liked the idea of being off the grid for a little while. But that peace quickly shifted into tension when I spotted a car up ahead, pulled to the shoulder with its hood open. I slowed down out of habit, thinking maybe they needed help. Maybe they had no way to call for assistance either. As I pulled over behind the car, I noticed a man standing beside it waving at me. He looked distressed and pointed at the engine. I parked my car a short distance away, kept the engine running, and stepped out cautiously. I asked if he needed help, and he immediately nodded, saying something about the car overheating. I looked around quickly, scanning the area for signs of other people, but it looked empty. I took a few steps closer, glancing at the engine, though I had no real idea how to fix anything. That was when I heard it. A soft crunch behind me, like a shoe stepping on dry gravel. I turned quickly, and another man was standing just a few feet away from my car. I had not seen him earlier. My stomach dropped and I realized too late that this was not a breakdown. It was a setup. The second man looked calm and focused, and something about the way he stared at me made everything inside me tense. I took a step back, trying not to show fear, but both men were now too close. I said I needed to get something from my car, and turned slowly, hoping they would not follow. As I moved, I heard the first man say something low, and the second one reached into his jacket. That was when I ran. I sprinted toward the driver's side, flung the door open, and dove in. The engine was still running, and I jammed the car into gear with shaky hands. As I slammed the door shut, one of them tried to grab at it, but I floored the gas pedal, and the car lurched forward. I did not look back. I just kept driving, heart pounding, trying to put as much distance between us as I could. For the first few miles, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights behind me. But the road remained dark and empty. My hands were trembling, and I could barely keep the wheel steady. I kept telling myself to breathe, to stay focused. I could not afford to make a mistake, not while I was still in such a remote area. Eventually, I reached a small gas station on the edge of the next town. I pulled in, locked the doors, and just sat there for a moment. My heart was still racing, and it took a minute before I could calm down enough to step out. I told the station attendant what had happened, and he offered to let me use the phone in the back to call the local authorities. I explained everything, every detail I could remember. The local police arrived after about 20 minutes. They asked me to take them back to the spot, so I led them down the same road. When we got there, the car was gone. No sign of the men, nothing but some faint tire marks in the dirt. They took my statement and said this was not the first time something like that had been reported in the area. It hit me later how close I had come to something much worse. If I had hesitated for even a few seconds longer, they might have overpowered me. I kept thinking about what might have happened if I had turned my back completely. I had trusted my instincts too late, but they still saved me. That realization stayed with me for a long time. I canceled the rest of my trip that evening and checked into a motel nearby. I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man's face, calm and unreadable. The way he appeared so suddenly, how easily they tried to trap me, it haunted me. I kept the lights on all night and stayed close to the phone, just in case. The next day, I gave a more detailed report at the police station. They thanked me for the information and said they would patrol the area more frequently. I left town shortly after and took a longer, safer route home. I avoided back roads and remote areas for months after that. Even familiar places felt different now, as if danger could hide behind anything. In time, I shared the story with friends and family, warning them about stopping on empty roads. Some listened with wide eyes, some dismissed it as a rare incident. But I knew better. I had lived through it. It was not just a story or an exaggerated warning. It was real, and it almost cost me everything. I started carrying a flashlight, a small emergency kit, and a personal alarm in my car. I also made sure to keep my phone charged and my gas tank full. I did not want to be caught off guard again. I understood now that caution was not the same as fear. Being prepared was just another form of survival. Looking back, I was grateful that I had not frozen or panicked. I had reacted just fast enough. It reminded me how unpredictable the world could be. Even when things seemed calm, there could be danger waiting in plain sight. But it also reminded me that I could trust myself when it mattered. That experience changed the way I approached travel. I researched every route, checked for emergency numbers, and made sure someone knew where I was going. It might have been a quiet road in the middle of nowhere, but it taught me a loud lesson about trust and instinct. I never stopped offering help when I could, but I learned to do it with more awareness. The men were never caught, at least not to my knowledge. But I knew they would try again, maybe with someone else. I just hoped that person would recognize the signs faster than I had. My story became a reminder to stay alert, even in places that seemed harmless. It taught me that danger does not always come with warning signs. Despite everything, I was proud of how I handled it. I stayed calm when it counted, acted quickly, and escaped a bad situation. I did not let it break me or stop me from living my life. I carried the fear for a while, but over time it turned into something stronger. It became a part of my story, a chapter where I faced the unexpected and came out safe on the other side. Story 4. It was just supposed to be a regular delivery. I had done a few drops earlier that day, but the last address stood out. It was deep in a wooded area, past the paved roads and into a place where GPS barely worked. The trees hung over the dirt road like a tunnel, and the silence was heavier than usual. I remember thinking I should not be out there alone, but the job needed to be done. The house itself was small, old, and partially hidden by overgrown shrubs. No one answered when I knocked, but the instructions said to leave the package by the side door. There was no sign of movement inside, no sound, not even from birds or insects nearby. It felt off. I left the package, snapped a quick photo for proof, and turned back toward the truck. I had only been away for 5 minutes, 10 at most, but when I returned to the truck, I stopped cold. My driver's side door had long, deep carvings scratched into the metal. The marks were not random. They formed words, sentences, but none of it made any clear sense to me. I scanned the woods, suddenly feeling like I was not alone out there. One of the carvings read, "The soil knows your weight." Another said, "Do not return before the last crow." There were other lines too, twisted and broken like someone speaking in riddles. At first I thought maybe some local kids were playing a prank, but the messages felt too intentional. Whoever did this knew I would be here, at this specific time. I ran my fingers over the grooves in the metal. The cuts were fresh, sharp, and deep enough to leave the paint curling away. I had not heard anything while I was at the house, no footsteps, no movement, nothing to suggest someone had come up behind me. That silence now seemed more sinister. I felt watched, like eyes were still on me. I unlocked the door and climbed inside, locking it behind me as soon as I shut it. I checked all around the cab, under the seats, even in the back, but no one was there. Still, my skin was crawling, and I could not shake the feeling that someone had been much closer than I realized. I turned the key and started the engine, ready to get back to the main road as fast as possible. Driving out of there was harder than I expected. The road seemed longer than it had coming in, and at every bend I thought I saw movement in the trees. Shadows flitted between the trunks, too fast and too distant to fully make out. I tried to focus on the road, but the words on my door echoed in my head. What did they mean? Why would someone write that? Back on the paved road, I finally felt a little safer, but I did not stop until I reached a gas station miles away. I pulled in under the bright lights, stepped out, and walked around the truck again. The carvings were still there, clearly visible. A few people glanced at them but said nothing. I took photos and sent them to my supervisor, asking if anyone else had experienced something similar. But there was no immediate response. The gas station attendant noticed my expression and asked if everything was okay. I told him about the delivery and the strange carvings. He gave me a long look and then shook his head slowly. He said that place had a reputation. Stories went around about people who went there and came back changed, or not at all. He said it had been abandoned for years. That made my stomach twist. I told him someone had ordered a package, and I left it at the side door. He raised his eyebrows and said the house had no power or water. No one had been known to live there in a long time. I wanted to believe he was mistaken, but his words only confirmed what I had felt out there. That house was not normal. Something about that place was wrong. I drove home that night with the carvings still etched into the side of my truck, replaying the event over and over in my head. Who could have known I would be there at that exact time? What was the purpose of those messages? They were warnings, that much was clear, but about what? I tried to dismiss it as a prank, but deep down I knew it was more than that. For days after, I felt unsettled. Every time I passed a wooded area, I checked for movement. I slept with the lights on. I even took a different truck for deliveries, refusing to go near that area again. The supervisor said nothing came up when they checked the order. No name, no payment method, no return address. It was like the order had never existed. I eventually took the truck to a body shop to get the carvings removed. The technician asked me what had happened, and when I explained, he turned pale. He said he had seen something similar before, years ago. Another driver, another secluded road, same kind of carvings. That driver quit his job not long after. Said he felt like he was being followed ever since. I started keeping a journal, writing down anything odd I noticed during deliveries. The little things at first. Mailboxes with black string tied around them. Packages that were too cold to touch. One time, a note taped to a front door that said, "We know what you saw." I never stayed long enough to find out what any of it meant. I dropped the packages and left. Then something strange happened. One morning, I found a message under my own windshield. The handwriting matched the carvings. It simply said, "Return once and see." I brought it to the supervisor, but again, there was no help. They chalked it up to someone trying to scare me. But it was not just about fear anymore. I wanted answers. I talked to the same investigator who had once helped someone I knew. I gave them everything I had, photos, dates, the order records. After a few days, they got back to me. The delivery request had come from a satellite address, something rerouted through several points to hide its origin. Whoever placed that order had gone to great lengths to cover their tracks. The investigator looked into the property itself and found something strange. The house had been owned by the same family for over 50 years, but no one had been recorded as living there in more than 2 decades. Utilities had not been active since then. Yet records showed that deliveries, calls, and even maintenance visits had continued off and on over the years. I asked if the messages on my truck could be linked to anything else. The investigator dug deeper and found old police reports of symbols carved into trees and barns in nearby areas. People had filed complaints, but no arrests were ever made. Most of the reports described the same strange sentences and warnings. They all ended with one note in common: the soil knows. Despite all of it, life slowly returned to normal. The carvings were buffed out, and no new messages appeared. My deliveries returned to routine. I never heard from whoever left those words again. Still, I never took another job that led me into woods, and I double-checked every address before accepting it. What happened out there changed something in me. It made me more aware, more cautious. But it also taught me that not everything can be explained right away. Sometimes all you can do is be careful, stay alert, and trust your gut. I may never know who carved those messages or why they chose me, but I made it out safe. That was enough. Story 5. I had been on the road since early that morning, just driving without much of a plan, needing to clear my head and get away for a while. The highway stretched endlessly in front of me, and I had no real destination in mind, just a vague intention of reaching the mountains before dark. Around late afternoon, I noticed my gas was running low, so I took the next exit, which led me into a small town nestled between thick woods and gently sloping hills. It looked like something out of a postcard, quiet and still, with old buildings and a sleepy main street. I figured I would fill up the tank, grab a drink, and get back on the road before the sun dipped behind the hills. As I pulled into the town, the first thing I noticed was how empty it seemed. There were cars parked along the street, and the lights in the stores were on, but I didn't see anyone walking around. It was the middle of the afternoon, yet there was no movement, no sound beyond the hum of my truck's engine. I slowed down, glancing around at the buildings, trying to spot a gas station. That was when I noticed someone peeking through a second-floor window of an old brick building. I caught a quick glimpse of a face before the curtain dropped. I shook it off as nothing at first, figuring maybe I had just startled someone. But then, as I continued down the main street, I noticed more of them. Faces behind curtains, behind glass doors, in shop windows. Men, women, even a few kids, just standing there and staring out at me without any expression. No one waved. No one stepped outside. They just watched. A cold sensation ran through me, and I felt something tighten in my chest. I found a gas station at the end of the street and pulled in quickly. The pumps looked old but functional, and there was a small convenience store attached to the station. As I stepped out of the truck, I could still feel eyes on me, like dozens of invisible hands pressing down on my back. I looked up and saw another face in the second-floor window of the store. The person didn't flinch or move, just stared. I filled up the tank as fast as I could and went inside to pay. The inside of the store was dim, and the air felt heavy, like it hadn't been ventilated in years. An older man stood behind the counter, his eyes never leaving me as I walked in. He didn't greet me or ask if I needed help. He just watched. I set a bottle of water on the counter and gave him the cash for the gas. He took it slowly, still not speaking, and handed me my change with a blank expression. I nodded politely, muttered a thank you, and turned to leave. As I stepped back outside, I noticed something strange. My truck, which had been spotless when I arrived, now had a handprint smudged on the rear window. It was faint, like someone had pressed their palm there while I was inside. I scanned the street again, but no one was outside. Just the same silent watchers behind the windows. I got into the truck quickly and locked the doors, feeling my heart begin to race. I drove out of the town, trying to keep my mind from spiraling into fear. I told myself it was just a weird place. Maybe the people were private. Maybe I was overreacting. But every time I looked into the rearview mirror, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a truck behind me. It was old, rusty, and had no plates. I didn't remember seeing it in the town, but now it was following me, keeping its distance but never turning away. I kept driving, hoping it would veer off at some point, but it didn't. The sun was getting lower in the sky, and I was heading toward the highway, thinking that once I was back on a major road I would feel safe. But the truck stayed with me, taking every turn I made, speeding up when I did, slowing down when I did. I tried pulling into a rest stop, thinking maybe it would pass by, but it pulled in too, staying several car lengths back. I sat there for a few minutes, pretending to look at a map, watching the truck in my mirror. No one got out. No lights turned on. It just sat there, the shadow of a figure barely visible behind the windshield. After a while, I decided I had to lose them. I pulled out quickly and took a sharp left down a road I didn't recognize. It curved and dipped through dense forest, but I kept going, hoping it would lead to another main road. For a while, I thought I had lost them. The truck wasn't in sight anymore, and the road ahead was clear. I allowed myself to relax just a little, thinking I might have imagined the worst of it. But then, as I rounded another bend, I saw it again in the rearview mirror. Same truck, same distance, still following. I gripped the wheel tighter and pushed down on the gas. The road grew narrower and the trees thicker. I didn't know where I was anymore, but I didn't want to stop. I felt trapped, hunted, like I was being toyed with. The sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows over the road, making everything look sinister. Every mile felt like a lifetime, and the truck never stopped following me. I was beginning to feel like I would never escape. Just as panic was starting to take over completely, I saw a sign ahead. It was for a ranger station and campsite, about 2 miles down the road. I turned in without thinking, hoping someone would be there, someone who could help. The station was small but well lit, with a couple of cars parked out front. I pulled in, parked near the building, and jumped out of the truck, heart pounding. I ran inside and found a ranger sitting behind a desk, speaking on a radio. He looked up when he saw me and immediately noticed how shaken I was. I explained everything in a rush, from the town to the people watching, to the truck that had been following me for miles. He listened carefully, then stepped outside with me to look around. The truck was gone, nowhere in sight. Not on the road, not in the trees. It had vanished. The ranger seemed concerned but calm. He said there had been reports before about strange behavior in that town, about people getting followed, people feeling watched. No crimes had ever been confirmed, but there was a history of unsettling stories. He offered to let me rest in a cabin nearby for the night, to regroup before heading back out in the morning. I hesitated at first, but I was too shaken to drive any farther. I accepted the offer, and he gave me a key and pointed me to a small cabin just a short walk from the station. It was simple but comfortable, with a bed, a lamp, and a small bathroom. I locked the door behind me and checked all the windows twice before settling down. I didn't sleep much that night, but I felt safer knowing someone was nearby, someone who believed me. By morning, the truck still hadn't returned. I packed my things and got back on the road, heading in the opposite direction from that town. I never found out who those people were or why they watched me. I never found out who was driving the truck or what they wanted. But I never forgot the feeling of being followed, of being watched by people who didn't want me there. It took me a while to stop checking my mirrors every few minutes, to stop jumping at every shadow on the road. But eventually I did. I took comfort in the fact that I had trusted my instincts and found help before things could get worse. I learned to listen to that gut feeling, to stay aware of my surroundings. And I never drove into a strange town without a full tank of gas again. Story 6. I had been on the road for hours, the kind of long stretch where the lines on the highway blur and every mile feels heavier than the last. The sun had disappeared hours ago, leaving only the dim glow of headlights and the occasional neon sign flickering past. I was too tired to keep driving, and the next town was still too far. My eyes were heavy, my focus slipping, and I knew pushing through was no longer safe. I pulled into the nearest rest area, a quiet stop surrounded by trees and barely lit by a few overhead lamps. The place was nearly empty, just one other vehicle parked several spaces away. I eased into a spot beneath a working light, turned off the engine, and cracked the window slightly to let in the cool night air. The silence was comforting at first, a welcome break from the constant hum of the highway. I reclined my seat, locked the doors out of habit, and closed my eyes. The fatigue hit fast, and before I knew it, I had drifted into a restless sleep. I didn't sleep deeply. It was the kind of doze where you float between awareness and dreaming, the unfamiliar surroundings making it hard to relax completely. I heard the occasional car drive past, distant engines fading into the night. Time passed without meaning, just an endless stretch of darkness and stillness. At some point, a noise woke me, something subtle but out of place. I wasn't sure what it was at first, maybe a shift in the air or a soft crunch of gravel. My eyes fluttered open, and for a moment I was disoriented. The dashboard glowed faintly in front of me, and everything outside the window was a mix of shadow and soft orange light from the nearby lamp. That was when I saw him. A man was standing just outside the driver's side window, no more than a few feet away. He wasn't moving, just standing there watching me. His face was mostly hidden by the shadow of a hood, but I could see the faint outline of his jaw, motionless, as if he had been there for a while. My heart started pounding, the kind of fear that doesn't need explanation or logic. I stayed still, hoping maybe he would go away if I didn't move. But he didn't. He kept standing there, not blinking, not shifting, just staring straight at me like he was waiting for something. I tried to reach for my phone without drawing attention, the movement slow and deliberate. It had slipped between the seat and the console, just out of reach. I debated starting the engine and peeling out of there, but I didn't know if he had anything on him. I didn't know if he had a weapon or if someone else was nearby. I looked around as subtly as I could, but I didn't see anyone else. Just me, him, and the dark silence of the rest area. The lights overhead flickered slightly, the shadows shifting as if they were alive. I felt trapped, like I had walked into a moment that wasn't meant to be disturbed. He moved, just a small tilt of his head, like he was examining me closer, and then he raised his hand. I flinched, but he didn't try to open the door or break the window. He just placed his hand on the glass, fingers spread wide, palm flat. I could see the grime on his skin, the faint trace of scars across his knuckles. It wasn't aggressive, just strange, unsettling in its stillness. He stood like that for several seconds, and then without warning he stepped back. I took that moment to grab my phone and start the engine. The sudden rumble made him stop and stare again, but he didn't move closer. I locked eyes with him through the glass, my hand hovering over the gear shift. Then slowly he turned and walked away. Not toward the woods, not toward the other car, just into the shadows at the far end of the rest stop. I couldn't see where he went after that. The trees swallowed him. I didn't wait around. I threw the truck into drive and pulled out fast, tires kicking up gravel as I sped back onto the highway. My hands were shaking, my breath uneven. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting him to appear again, running behind me or emerging from the dark. But there was nothing. Just the road stretching ahead and the occasional blur of trees. I didn't stop again until I reached a small gas station about 20 miles down. I parked under the brightest light I could find and sat there for a few minutes trying to process what had happened. I didn't call the police. I didn't have anything to report beyond a strange man watching me, and I knew they would probably brush it off. Maybe he was homeless. Maybe he was mentally unstable. Or maybe it was something worse, something I was lucky to have avoided. The what-if circled my mind long into the night. I went inside the gas station and bought a cup of coffee, hoping the caffeine would wash away the unease. The clerk gave me a polite nod, and for a second I almost asked if they had heard anything about weird activity at the rest stop. But I didn't. I kept it to myself and got back in the truck. I didn't sleep again that night. I drove until sunrise, letting the light chase away the fear that had settled deep inside. Days passed, and I kept thinking about it, about his face, or rather, the lack of it. I never really saw his eyes. I never heard his voice. Just that hand on the glass and the feeling that I had been targeted for something. But nothing happened afterward. No one followed me. No signs he had tracked me down. It became a memory, one that lost its sharpness but never its weight. I started taking precautions after that. I planned my routes better. I avoided rest stops at night, unless they were well lit and busy. I kept my doors locked, my phone charged, and my eyes open. It became part of my routine, a quiet shift in the way I moved through the world. I told myself I was smarter now, that I had learned from that night. And I had. I never saw him again, never heard another word, but I always felt like I had brushed up against something dangerous. Something that had chosen not to act for reasons I might never understand. In a strange way, I felt lucky, like I had been given a warning and a second chance. And I never forgot how easily things could have gone another way if I had woken up just a little later. Story 7. I had been driving for hours through quiet back roads, the kind of route I took when avoiding traffic on my long hauls. The highway had been closed unexpectedly due to construction, and the detour signs pointed me into unfamiliar territory. My truck was nearly empty, and I was headed home after a delivery, just trying to make it back before the early morning. I was tired but still alert, sipping coffee that had gone lukewarm. The road twisted through empty fields and dark woods, with no lights except for my own headlights cutting through the dark. I should have known something was off when the road signs stopped appearing altogether. There were no markings, no house numbers, no indication of where I actually was. The GPS had lost signal miles ago, and my cell phone showed 0 bars. Still, I figured if I kept moving forward, I would eventually hit a main road again. The night was silent except for the hum of my engine and the occasional bump in the road. After another 10 minutes of driving, I saw lights in the distance. They were dim and flickering, like lanterns or weak porch bulbs, not like streetlights at all. I slowed down as I entered what looked like a small, tucked-away neighborhood. It was oddly quiet, and the houses seemed old, maybe from decades past, but they looked lived in. There were cars in the driveways, toys on the lawns, clotheslines with drying sheets fluttering gently in the night breeze. Everything appeared normal, but there was an unnatural stillness in the air. I pulled up to the first intersection I saw, planning to turn around or at least find a way out. But as I came to a stop, several people began to emerge from the houses. They didn't run or shout, but walked slowly, deliberately, as if I had triggered something by arriving there. I rolled down my window to ask for directions, hoping someone could help me find my way back to the main road. But no one spoke. They just stood there, watching, forming a loose circle around my truck. It was unsettling, the way they stared without blinking, without saying a word. I tried to be polite, offering a friendly wave and a nervous smile, asking if I had taken a wrong turn. No one answered. A man stepped forward, tall with a beard, and pointed toward the center of the neighborhood. I wasn't sure what that meant, but something about the way he did it felt like an order, not a suggestion. I hesitated, then slowly pressed the gas and began driving where he had pointed. The street narrowed as I drove deeper into the neighborhood. More people were standing along the edges now, watching as I passed. No one smiled, no one waved back. Their expressions were blank, unreadable, and yet I could feel a strange pressure in the air, like something was wrong and I was not supposed to be there. My hands gripped the wheel tighter as I reached what looked like a small square in the middle of the neighborhood, surrounded by more homes and an old church. I stopped the truck again, glancing around to see if maybe someone would finally speak up. But the crowd grew thicker, gathering behind me now, cutting off the way I had come. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw more of them stepping out from alleyways, from behind fences, from porches. My heart began to pound in my chest. I rolled up the window and locked the doors without thinking. There was no obvious threat, but everything about the situation screamed danger. I tried turning the truck around, carefully angling the wheels, but the people didn't move. They stood their ground, staring at me through the windshield and side windows. I pressed the horn lightly, hoping that would get their attention in a different way, but no one flinched. They didn't move, didn't speak, just watched me like I was something they were waiting for. I considered calling the police, but my phone still had no signal. I was completely alone in this. After several minutes of tension, someone approached the passenger side window. It was a woman, middle-aged, wearing a faded dress and holding something in her hand. I leaned slightly toward the window, squinting to see what it was. She held up a small wooden cross, tapping it gently against the glass, then stepped back. Another man approached the front of the truck and laid his hand on the hood. Slowly, more people followed suit, touching the truck with open palms. I had no idea what they were doing. I was frozen, unsure if they were trying to intimidate me or bless me or trap me. Every part of me wanted to slam the truck into reverse and get out of there, but the road behind me was now blocked. I realized I had driven into something far stranger than I could have imagined. I shifted into gear and slowly started moving forward, hoping the people in front of me would step aside. Some did, reluctantly, as if they knew I was going to push through no matter what. After creeping down the street for a few minutes, I spotted an alley between two houses. It was narrow, but I thought maybe if I angled the truck just right, I could squeeze through. I veered toward it, tires crunching on gravel, and hit the gas just enough to make the turn. The truck scraped against one of the fences, but I didn't care. I had to get out. Behind me, I heard shouting for the first time, the people running toward me now, but not fast enough. The alley led to another road, rough and unpaved, but wide enough to drive through. I floored it, not stopping to look back. My heart was racing, hands shaking on the wheel, but I kept driving. Eventually, the gravel turned back to asphalt, and the road widened. I saw lights again in the distance, real street lights this time, and the sounds of traffic far off. The second I saw a highway sign, I nearly cried. I had made it out. I did not stop driving until I reached the nearest gas station miles away. I parked the truck, got out, and stood in the cold air for a while, trying to steady my breathing. My phone buzzed suddenly, signal restored, and I quickly checked the map. The neighborhood I had been in didn't even appear. It was like it wasn't listed anywhere. I called a friend just to hear a familiar voice and confirm that I was back in the real world. For days after that, I tried to make sense of what happened. I searched online, tried looking up the area, but there was no mention of it anywhere. I even contacted some local forums and asked if anyone had ever heard of a place matching the description. A few people responded, saying it sounded like an old settlement that had been abandoned years ago, but no one could give me clear directions to it. It was as if I had driven into a place that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. I never went back, never even came close to that part of the state again. I stuck to the highways after that, no more shortcuts, no more detours. Still, I sometimes think about the people who surrounded my truck, their silent stares and unmoving faces. I wonder if they were trying to scare me or protect me. I will never know for sure. But I am thankful I made it out, thankful I trusted my instincts, and thankful that I never saw them again. Story 8. It was just past 3 a.m. when I started my usual route. The roads were quiet, the kind of silence that only came with the early hours before sunrise. I enjoyed this time, the hum of the engine beneath me and the empty stretches of highway ahead. Driving gave me peace, a routine that rarely changed. I had done this route so many times I could almost do it with my eyes closed. As I rounded a bend near the outskirts of town, I noticed a truck pulled over on the shoulder of the road. It was an older model, one I had not seen before. The headlights were off, but the door on the driver's side was wide open. A man stood next to it, completely still, facing the cab. At first I thought he might be making a quick repair or checking something. I slowed down, watching him carefully as I passed. He didn't turn to look at me, didn't wave, didn't even move a muscle. His posture was too straight, too stiff. Something about the scene didn't feel right, and I felt a knot form in my stomach. I glanced at my mirrors, debating whether I should stop. But normally I would not interfere. Drivers stop all the time for all sorts of reasons. Maybe he was just tired or dealing with a flat tire. But this felt different. I could not explain why, but the stillness of the man, combined with the silence of the night, made the scene unsettling. I pulled over a little ahead, flicked on my hazard lights, and stepped out. I walked back slowly, my boots crunching gravel underfoot. The closer I got, the stranger everything seemed. The man had not moved at all. I could see him more clearly now, his face partially lit by the faint glow of the dashboard light. His eyes were wide open, but there was something empty in his stare. His arms hung loosely at his sides, fingers slightly curled. I stopped a few feet away and called out. No response. I called again, louder this time. Still nothing. I took a cautious step forward, unsure if he was conscious or frozen in shock. The truck's engine was off, and there were no sounds except the occasional rustle of wind through the nearby trees. I repeated myself, asking if he needed help, but he stayed frozen, unmoving. I circled around to get a better look, and that was when I noticed his breathing. Shallow, barely noticeable. He was alive, but clearly not all right. I did not want to touch him in case he was injured. I leaned in and tried to speak softly, asking if he had been in an accident or if he was okay. Finally, his eyes shifted slightly, like he was trying to focus on me but couldn't. I decided to call for help. I walked back to my truck and used my phone to contact emergency services. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, gave them our location, and waited for them to arrive. But while waiting, I kept watching the man, making sure he did not fall or wander into the road. Every few minutes I checked in again, just in case he came to. It took a while, but a patrol car eventually showed up, followed by a medical vehicle. The officers approached him carefully while I explained what I had seen. They tried speaking to him, but he gave no answers. One of them checked his pulse and gently guided him to sit down. The medics joined in, examining him while the officer asked me more questions. I told them everything I had seen from the moment I passed by to when I made the call. They nodded and thanked me, then began looking over his truck. There were no signs of damage, no flat tires, no indication of an accident. It was like he had simply stopped and frozen. The officers found his ID, confirmed his name, and told me they would contact his family. Before I left, one of the medics told me the man was in shock, though they didn't yet know why. There were no visible injuries. He hadn't spoken a word since they arrived. They would take him to the hospital and keep him under observation. I watched as they helped him into the ambulance, still silent, still staring ahead. The rest of my shift felt heavier. I could not stop thinking about him, standing so still, like something had drained the life right out of him. It was not normal, and I had no answers. All I could do was keep moving forward, finish my route, and hope he would be all right. That kind of moment sticks with you longer than you expect. A few days passed, and I couldn't shake the memory. I asked around at a few rest stops if anyone had heard about what happened. Most people had no idea. Then, one morning at a diner along the route, I overheard two other drivers talking. They mentioned a man found standing by his truck, dazed, not responding. Same description, same place. I introduced myself and asked what else they knew. They said they had heard he was recovering, but still not speaking. No one knew why he had stopped or what had caused the state he was found in. There were rumors, of course. Some drivers said it was stress. Others claimed he had seen something out there on the road. But no one had real answers. Eventually, I heard from one of the officers who had been at the scene. He recognized me at a gas station and thanked me again for stopping that night. He said the man was doing better, speaking in short sentences and slowly recalling things. But apparently he had been on a long drive, alone for hours, when he started feeling disoriented. The next thing he remembered was waking up in the hospital. The officer said the doctors believed it was a combination of extreme exhaustion and some kind of emotional overload. Nothing criminal, no foul play, just a man who had pushed himself too far. The body and mind can only take so much, especially on long roads with little rest. I felt a bit of relief knowing he was healing, even if the full picture was still unclear. That night changed the way I looked at my route. I started being more mindful of others on the road, slowing down more often when I saw someone pulled over. I began checking in with other drivers more regularly, even small talk at truck stops. We all spend so much time alone that it's easy to forget how fragile we can be. In time, the story of that night faded into the background of my memory, but the lesson stayed. Sometimes it's not about figuring everything out. Sometimes it's just about being there, being the one who stops, who notices, who cares enough to act. I never saw that man again, but I hoped he had found peace and rest. The road can be a lonely place, but a little kindness goes farther than most people realize. Story 9. I was driving back from a short trip out of town, the sun already setting behind the hills, as I made my way through the quieter roads that cut across the countryside. I liked these roads more than the highways, even though they were a bit longer. They felt calmer, more peaceful, like the world slowed down a little. The music played softly from the radio, and I was halfway through a bottle of water when I noticed a figure by the side of the road. He had his thumb out, wearing a faded jacket and jeans that looked dusty, like he had been walking a long time. Normally, I would never stop. I had always been warned not to pick up strangers, especially when alone. But something about him made me hesitate. Maybe it was the way he stood, not desperate, just tired, or maybe it was just the loneliness creeping in after hours of driving. I slowed down and rolled down the window just enough to speak. He leaned in slightly and asked if I was headed toward the next town. I nodded. He didn't give a name or much of an explanation, but I told him he could ride with me for a bit. He nodded, opened the door, and got in without another word. We rode in silence for a while. I kept glancing at him from the corner of my eye. He looked young, maybe early 20s, though the dirt on his face made him look older. His eyes were dark, distant, like he had seen something that he couldn't quite forget. I asked him where he was going, and he said just a few miles out, near an old gas station. He did not talk much, only offering short answers when I asked about where he came from, or if he had any family nearby. I stopped pushing. It was clear he did not want to share. I turned the radio back on, hoping to make the ride less awkward. He seemed fine with it, staring out the window like he was watching something far away. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the road. At one point, I offered him a snack I had left in the